Rassie and Alistair asked me like, listen, don't you want to stay with the senior squad and we'll give you a Super Rugby contract?
You could hardly run. Nothing we were doing for you from a standard therapy point of view was working.
The next game is the most important game. I must play the next game. Let's park that issue and keep it there.
To stake your life on rugby is a huge gamble.
He said to me, let him go, man. Let him go. He's gonna be so much better if he comes back.
I haven't retired from anything.
Pad competition.
Now this is special.
Yeah.
Made me think of my twins, and then a buddy of mine gave this to me. I always wanted this. I didn't quite have the money, but now the twins are always here.
No,
Don't know. Yeah, don't touch them. Okay, Doc, you've met Kitshoff just now, but you've never been his team doctor. Kitshoff is Dr. Jon Patricios. He was my second doctor since I played rugby. The first one was Dr. Louis Holtzhausen, but Dr. Patricios was my second doctor. And I won't talk too long, but I only last night found out you was just 4 years older. Well, you're still only 4 years older than me when you were actually our team doctor. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. The time has gone past very quickly from when we were both involved in the 1990s. Yeah, we're about the same era.
Yeah, I can talk the ideas, and I'm not great at hosting these things, but we want to share obviously with the supporters and whoever listens to this, the doctor stories, player stories, and everything. But Kitshoff is obviously a guy that had an unfortunate ending to his career. I mean, some guys are lucky, like a Skalk Brits and a Beesman Tarawira, they finish and they decide when they finish, and some of us or some guys are not lucky enough. And I just thought maybe a good thing for you who's been so long in the game, and I know you're not a team doctor anymore. So Kitshoff, welcome for your work. Dankie. Thanks that you're here. It is also a bit weird. I'm never that close to players. I keep my distance from them a little bit. So yeah, it's interesting how this one will go, Kitshoff, but we'll see. So Doc, I think the first question that people always ask, I always doesn't know how to 100% work. Difference between a doctor and a team doctor.
Look, it's a very interesting thing. So being in sports medicine is quite different for a couple of reasons. The one is that you operate in quite a public space in professional sport. So typically when I'm seeing a patient, even a sports patient in this office, what happens within these four walls stays here. Whereas in a team environment in professional sport, it's quite public. So people know about the players' injuries. There's a lot of stakeholders. So the coaches want to know, the other players want to know, the board members want to know, the sponsors want to know, and the public also think they have a right to know about a player's injury. So you're operating in quite a different environment, which ethically is quite challenging because you have to treat the player as a patient, but there's a slight difference there. So ethically it's quite challenging. And the second thing is that professional sport, and particularly professional rugby, is a tough game. And you will know, and Steven will know, it's very rare that a player goes onto the field week in and week out and they're not carrying some sort of niggle. So there are often ethical challenges. Is it safe to put that player back? Is he right to go? And obviously there's a different spectrum of injuries. So something like concussion you'd never risk. But an ankle sprain, you might say, well, it's a World Cup semi-final. We're going to take a chance with this athlete. So there's a couple of differences there to between being a team doctor operating in a team environment and operating in a closed, confidential office space, trying to balance the two.
Yeah, and Doc, I mean, when you look at those things, sometimes a coach and a player, and I'm sure Kitshoff's gone through this, think the next game is the most important game. I must play the next game. But there's always life after rugby, and you don't 100% know when it's going to end. And sometimes the coach expect the guy to be ready the next day or train the next day. And the player wants to play the next game because, he wants to play either Springbok or Stormers or wherever you are. And I sometimes think we are lucky I know we are lucky in South Africa, and Kitshoff will give you a gap now. It's just that I don't think a lot of people know, especially some of the guys who give a lot of comments on our 6-2 split and all of those kind of things, that player safety I mean, you know our Box Smart program. It's one of the leading programs in the world. I mean, Kitshoff was 18 years old. And Kitshoff, you can now answer. I've spoken enough. But he was 18 years old, and we wanted him to play professional rugby. And because he was in the front row, he wasn't actually the age banning for a front row player playing in senior rugby. And Doc, if you want to elaborate a little bit on Box Smart now, if you want to, I can also. But Kitshoff, yeah, you, Eben, Frans, Malherbe, Sia, Skara, and those guys were the first guys, not I, but the Western Province guys, contract the first time. I won't say the amounts, it wasn't a lot of amounts then, but can you remember when we asked you the first time to, can you play senior rugby? And then you had to go through, can you explain those testing series? Can you remember that?
Yeah, I think I was still busy with matric exams, and then got the phone call to say, listen, come and train with the senior guys in the preseason, off-season camp. And went through that 4 weeks of training, worked with yourself, Russ, and with Steph Tatoy was the SNC coach back then. And yeah, it was almost found my feet in the gym and the strength, and found myself working through all those training methods and habits and stuff. And then the year after was when I was still in that first year after school. I was still like 18 years old. Super Rugby started, and then Rassie and Alistair asked me, like, listen, don't you want to stay with the senior squad and we'll give you a Super Rugby contract? And that's when I had to go through the bench press. I think I had to bench like 1.8% my body weight.
Yeah.
I think I had to squat like twice my body weight. I had to do a bleep test at a certain pace, and to do a certain amount of pull-ups. And yeah, luckily got through it, barely, but yeah. And then from there went into the senior squad.
Yeah, an 83 test match later. Docky will get back to Box Smart and how a player ends his career, and sometimes the emotional stuff that goes with that when you guys have to make decisions. But I think for you, I met your father then, and first thing is that dad wants you to play. I know your dad was a Bull supporter, and I know we had to fight with the Bulls a hell of a lot to contracted Kitshoff. Am I right? Your dad was a Bull supporter, so we got him eventually to the Stormers. But just maybe finishing off the Box Smart, which is a SA rugby program which Dr. Wayne Viljoen runs. That doesn't only look at spinal injuries and catastrophic injuries, which really has been controlled well, but it also, I think, Kitshoff, it takes players, Doc, with the doctor to make, for him to make a decision now on 83 test matches, 17 short of 100 test matches, and making the right decision, because there's life after rugby, Doc. There's.
I think, two things there. We are light years ahead of where we are in injury prevention and the focus on that compared to where we were 20 or 30 years ago. And I'm very proud to say that South Africa has been at the forefront of that. So as you mentioned, Dr. Wayne Viljoen has led this program called Box Smart. So what that really means is that every coach and every referee in South Africa has to go through this Box Smart injury prevention program. So they learn to identify how to recognize serious injuries and how to point them in the right direction. And there's a big emphasis on conditioning, exactly what Kitshoff just said, about making sure you're prepared for rugby at any specific level. So if you're going to play senior rugby, you have to meet certain standards. Otherwise, we recognize there's an injury risk. And certainly from a spinal injury point of view, the incidence has decreased considerably. So that's the one aspect. The second aspect that you mentioned is this career-ending decision, which I'm very interested to hear Kitshoff's perspective on it, which is a challenging one. Quite often, it's not an easy decision because it's not clear-cut, and there's often considerations about carrying on despite your injury. But for me, that's where the doctor needs to be independent. He has to take the opinion that it's the player as a person that's important moving forward, and that there's a lot of things that happen after rugby. And my message often to young schoolboys and schoolgirls and their parents is that rugby has to be a parallel career. To stake your life on rugby is a huge gamble. You don't know when it might end. It might end when you're 19, it might end when you're 35. But even if it ends when you're 35, you've still got a long life after that. So I really want to emphasize the two things. You need to be conditioned, and you need to make sure you plan for a life with and after rugby, and that's critical in taking on your career. Once that's in place, you can embark on your rugby career with confidence.
Spot on, Doc. I think the way Dr. Shooter and Davis, who was a spinal, the surgeon on my neck, both had the same advice. It's not playing that extra 17 test matches and affecting the next 40 years. It's making the right decision at that moment to live a comfortable 40 years after that. So that decision wasn't made for me. I still had to physically go and say, listen, Russ, Dobbo, I can't carry on playing rugby because of X, Y, and Z. But having the doctor being independent in his thought process, actually thinking about my health, was actually what made the decision a bit easier at the end of the day. Like, not really willing to sign off on carrying on playing rugby, but actually saying, listen, yeah, in my opinion, this is the best for your future. And that's how we basically came to the decision.
And also that there were other people involved in that decision. You know, you had discussions with several people over a period of time, and you got a lot of input and then time to process it. I think that's important as well.
And Doc, I'll tell you, if you know Kitsy, and I would love to share this for the people who's listening. If you know Kitsy, he was very young playing a front row already. You know, he's got a career. I don't know how many Stormers games you've played. You've played in Bordeaux, am I right?
Yeah.
You've played in Ulster. You know, we must actually talk a little bit about that for the people who say we're not allowed to let players go and play overseas. I've got a little bit of a theory behind that. But if you just think, we started the bomb squad with Kitsy, and the kind of guy he was with that. You know, I would, if somebody told me last year this time, I said, no, Kitsy will be at the next World Cup. You know, for me as a coach, and I sometimes think the coaches pressure, if we didn't have the Box Smart program, and we didn't every 2 years had to renew that, and I don't want to punt it too much, but, you know, the things that we sometimes see and hear and go and visit people in a hospital, doesn't make the decision easier, but, you know, just knowing Kitsy, always there, always fit, always one of the fittest props. You know, maybe we can share this while you're on, Doc. I actually even one time promised him, and I must say he's one of the guys that handled it the best. I promised him the captaincy the next week, and I never knew the Springbok captaincy was such a big thing. But yeah, just before we go back to the medical side of things, it was just and I'm not sucking up to him because I don't have to anymore. You know, he doesn't have to play for us on Saturday. I'm just really respectful for the bomb squad. Wouldn't have started if him and Malcolm and the guys didn't accept it. You know, for a guy who I said, Kitsy, if nothing changed, you're probably going to be Springbok captain next week. Never even asked me again. He wasn't captain. Never even asked me again. Pitch up for a training session. Yeah, it's just really sad when that happens. But to see the way he handles that as well now again, it's an example for some of the younger guys. Because every dad wants his child to play for the Springboks, but there's only been 900 in the history. And then to get it cut short like that. So, yeah, Kirsty, first thing, thank you for that. Second thing is, I hope the bomb squad lager works post your rugby. Then just maybe while Doc is on the call, you know, maybe take us through when I promised you the captaincy and actually didn't make through on my promise.
No, it's that was that Test match Argentina Cup. When was it? Just before the World Cup. And so no, Rassie came to me and said, listen, yeah, if everything goes to plan, no injuries, you looking good after this weekend, you'll probably captain us against Argentina. And then in that week, he realized, I think either medical staff or someone told him, like, listen, Kitsy's been playing a lot of minutes back to back every weekend. And then he turned around and said, listen, Kitsy, I think you're more important for us for that. Was it New Zealand we played?
Yeah, 2 weeks time.
In 2 weeks' time, he said, like, I think you're more important for that game. So I'm going to keep you out of the squad this weekend. You're going to run water, run touch, carry all the messages, play a massive role in the game. But we're going to give Bongi the captaincy. And I understood what my role was for that weekend. So enjoyed Argentina, had a bit more drinks the Wednesday with the steak. And then I could only focus on carrying messages onto the field.
Yeah, and I'm actually sweating now while you're saying it because one feels so guilty about that. But that's Doc, and I guess that's the kind of player you want. I mean, if you don't mind me hopping around, Kitsy, I mean, there was a time when remember I had that Gilmore's groin thing, and I know it's not about me. We're talking about Kitsy now. But sometimes if the trust isn't mutual between the coach, the doctor, and the player, it gets a bugger up, because there's also sometimes new things, and I certainly didn't have, at that stage when I was playing for the Cats or the Lions at that stage, I certainly had a very selfish mentality, Doc, if you can remember that. I remember I wrote a letter for you when I left from the Cheetahs from the Lions back to the Cheetahs, saying thank you for everything. But there were many firsts where there had to be trust built up. I mean, can you remember?
That's correct. And I must tell you that as medical practitioners, we learn a lot from that environment and from the players as well. So if I may, with your permission, talk a little bit around that groin injury, because it was a great learning experience. As you know, back in the 1990s, you had this really chronic groin. You could hardly run. You couldn't step off one leg or the other because of your groin pain. And there's this concept of the sports groin, or Gilmore's groin, named after an Irish surgeon called Jerry Gilmore. And it was really a steep learning curve for us, because nothing we were doing for you from a standard therapy point of view was working, you'll remember. And I worked at that stage with an orthopedic surgeon called Dr. Mark Ferguson. And between us, we really investigated what internationally was being done for this injury. And we found that it was a common soccer injury. And we contacted people in the UK and in Germany, a surgeon called Dr. Mushevik. And eventually we found the surgical technique, which after you went through everything, and you remember we even had you at Pilates classes. Do you remember that?
Yeah. It was interesting. I remember the instructor. I remember the Pilates instructor, yeah.
Yeah, and we just couldn't, injections, nothing worked. And then eventually you were the first person in the country to have that operation where they tightened up your groin muscles, and you rehabilitated after that and came back. So, that was for us quite an interesting, steep learning curve in terms of trying to get a player who's at the forefront of his game back on the field, and learning from the player, learning from other professionals, and learning from people overseas. It was a very interesting time for us.
Kitsy, Doc, I remember post that op. Yeah, when I looked down, there was everything was just blue. So it was a new look that I had after that operation, but we won't go into detail there. But Doc, the interesting one is, and while you're on the call, I might share it to Kitsy, you might help us out. There's a lot of people that's very vocal about guys having to play in South Africa, and but they don't, a coach can always go, and he might coach till, I don't know, I might coach till I'm 54 or 50, I don't know where, as long as you get a job somewhere. But a player doesn't have that luxury. And a lot of people are very outspoken about, our players shouldn't play overseas and they shouldn't be selected for the Springbok team. But, with our currency currently, and this is not on the medical side of things, but just thinking that Kitsy went to Bordeaux. Wasn't Bordeaux City of the Year also somewhere? Yeah, I think so he stayed in a nice city there. And obviously, I think you learned a lot about scrumming there. You came back, you were an awesome scrummer always, but I know that's a hard learning school, to call it that way. But maybe the thing, Doc, because my career at 29, I broke my foot, and we're not going to go into my career, but I mean, I didn't plan post 29 years old. Now, for Kitsy to plan, you 34 or 33.
Yeah.
Now, I had him blocked in, well, if I'm still the coach at 2027, to be one of the loose heads that go there. Now people love to say, why can this guy oversee it and then can't be selected for the Springboks? I'm all against a young guy going abroad and then think we're going to pick him from there. And maybe, Kitsy, you can answer this one. But, I think it's very unfair to expect a player, if you've got, it can be 4 years, can be 5 years, and that's why Doc probably say you have to have something parallel running. But not everybody earns in South African rand that amount of money to plan if the injury stops them at 25. So
yeah, I agree. But Rassie, I'm going to disagree with you on two things. One is it is a medical thing, because we do the same as doctors. I've just come back from Ireland, where I learned a lot from my colleagues there. I'm going to America once a year to learn. Now, why shouldn't players expose themselves to different environments, different coaches, and then bring that back. I mean, and then you as a coach are getting real value because they've learned new skills, they've been exposed to new opposition, and then you as a coach, a director of rugby, whoever you are, have the ability to tap into that added value. That's what I do as a doctor. I go and find new experiences overseas. I interact with my colleagues and I try and bring that back so my patients in Johannesburg and around the country benefit. Now, why shouldn't a professional rugby player be any different? So I do think that apart from the financial thing, it is an issue, and I'm really in favor of broadening the scope for players as long as it's ultimately to the benefit of South African rugby.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think Bordeaux was big eye opener because all I was used to back then was playing South African franchise, playing a bit of Super Rugby, but then throwing myself into the top 14. You're playing against guys you've never heard of. You're scrumming against guys twice your size. They don't really pick athletic front rowers. They look purely for size and strength. And then you come up against these guys. And I mean, the thing I remember from Super Rugby was fast-paced, good skill set, dynamic players, all right scrummages, but then you go to top 14, it's a slower game. It's more, the weather conditions aren't always perfect. So, and then you come up against some of the nastiest guys you've ever seen. And then I think the experience you gain in those couple of years is instrumental for your future.
Yeah, we actually only had Super Rugby, and which was New Zealand and Argentina, and the old days had Bajada Scrum, whatever they call it, but I don't think they quite do that anymore. But I mean, we didn't. It was the New Zealanders, as you say, and we played against them week in and week out. That was, and then URC now helps us, and then we do play European Cup in the highest league. But I remember Peter de Villiers telling me, the scrum coach, Peter de Villiers, who also played in France a lot. Yeah. He said to me, "Let him go, man. Let him go. He's gonna be so much better if he comes back." And I mean, exactly what you're saying there. But you also had a stint at Ulster, but that was like a year.
Yeah, just post 23 World Cup.
Yeah, and I just maybe want to finish that off, Doc, before we get maybe a little bit on the medical side of things again. I just think people must accept that if you don't know how long your career is, and, you know, we don't have the money in South Africa to keep you here, and you've done your dues here as a young guy. I mean, coaches go abroad. Most of the coaches, I mean, Johan van Graan is doing well. I mean, Jake was at Montpellier. You know, I was at Munster. You know, Franco Smith is doing, Jacques is now at Leinster. But a coach can plan and come back, and he can coach maybe till he's 60 or longer. Some coaches coach longer. And I just maybe think that is something that there will always be a debate about it. But my point of view is, yes, like, you know, you will learn there, and if your career ends a year or two earlier, you've earned a few more bucks. So let's park that issue and keep it there. Doc, then I think, Kitsy, help me out here. You didn't plan to stop this year. I think it's very tough for administrators, maybe even doctors, presidents of unions, very rich people who's involved in rugby, normal players, coaches. I think the struggle is also to suddenly just be out of the mix. I know of a few of my mates who really struggled with that. Not really because of the financial thing, but just listen, now rugby is quite big in South Africa and you were part of it. And I guess, Kitsy, first thing is you love the Springboks and you were away from it. But Doc, you on your side, Maggie, on the players post that?
Yeah, I think we're talking about the mental health aspect to a large extent, is that, you know, you're a player that you're used to this environment, maybe from when you're 15 years of age. You've been in a very structured environment, played first team at school where you're the heroes, you go into under 20 setups, then into provincial, then you're playing at an international level, you know, people asking for interviews, you've got a social media presence. And it's probably escalated now in the era of social media, this limelight that the players are in. And it's a short period of time relatively, and then suddenly that's cut short. And how do you deal with that from a mental perspective? Not just that your salary, your income's been affected, but your whole framework as a player, the way you define yourself as a rugby player and a professional sports person has been taken away. And we increasingly recognize that, and to their credit, World Rugby's recognized that to the extent they've launched what they call a brain health program. So South Africa is the 4th country actually to sign up to it. So ex-players can actually arrange a consultation with a medical person free of charge to talk about these things and say, listen, I'm really struggling since I stopped rugby. Can you point me in the right direction? And these things weren't in place a few years ago. So I'm very interested in what Kitsy has to say about this, because it must be a huge mind shift in terms of what's happened in the last few weeks.
Yeah, I think probably from my side, it's just trying to bamboozle my own mind in the words I use. So I haven't retired from anything. I've just made a career change. So I went from playing rugby full time into running businesses. And I've tried to structure my weeks in a similar way to the way we got a program from Chala or from our S&C guys. I try and structure my week as in a similar way, doing the same things on the same days. So just like have the structure, which keeps me busy and keeps my mind occupied. I think probably time-wise, it's going to become more difficult as we're going into international season. It's going to start seeing the guys play again. I'm going to see the fireworks and the anthem and the physicality of the game. And I think that's when I'm truly going to start missing it, because now it's fine. You're watching a bit of URC rugby, a bit of club rugby. It's intense. But I think when the boys start playing in the internationals again, that's because I already, end of year rugby, I already started feeling not depressed, but I was like sad that I'm not there and I can't play and I can't contribute towards the team I love so much. And I think that's going to catch me in the long run.
Yeah. And I think that applies to everybody. If you said to me, close the door, walk out of your medical office, that's the end. I mean, it would be devastating. Devastating. It's what you've worked for so long. And I don't think the public appreciate that, that you one day were a professional rugby player and literally the next day that door was closed. It really is a difficult thing to come to terms with. And you've framed it nicely, but it's a process that no doubt you'll have to work through.
Yeah. Well, we actually had an alignment camp this morning with the players based in Japan, and tonight we're having an alignment camp with the players based in the UK. And we obviously had the alignment camp with the local players here. And when Don was actually presenting, he actually said, it was Vincent, I think. Vincent, Kitsy. And he was actually, you're so used to naming Kitsy's name there. I don't want to make this emotional, but I think Kitsy, we're not going to dwell on this too much on the emotional side, I'm sure. We'll make sure that there's a proper send-off. We didn't get an opportunity last year because we didn't know when you're going to stop, but we'll definitely get you in. And I think it's given the players a wake-up call. Because you were the prop that runs in front. You were the guy who was the fittest. You were, of the props. I'm talking about the props. And it was just always there, happy, and took it on the chin. And I think when I saw the guys' faces this morning, and we just talked about that. I think both ways. First thing is well done that you're taking it that way, and I'm sure it's going to be more emotional as the games get played. We might talk a little bit when we say goodbye to Doc. What's it after rugby? Because I don't think you must stay too long out of the game, in my opinion. Doc, just quickly, before maybe we say goodbye to you and I keep on chatting here because it might just not be so much medical, but it's really insightful from you. It's not just players that need it, eh? It's coaches also. I think sometimes the people think a team doctor is just the players. He looks after the players, but you've handled from me. I've won that battle now, but I couldn't pick up weight. I think I weighed 92 and you send me for all these. And then later when you become a coach, you're stressed out and you actually go to the team doctor when you are feeling you're having a bit of a not panic attack, but you're getting too stressed out now. So certainly it's not just the diagnosis and sorting everybody out. It's also managing a lot of people. Maybe the last one to you.
Exactly, and being a sounding board and just being there as a support team. And actually the medical team works together to try and do that. So I always regarded the physiotherapist as one of the great sort of mental supports. There's a lot of conversations that take place on that physio massage bed, the plinth. So it's a very important aspect. Increasingly, there's mental health coaches and support teams. But you're right, it's a very stressful environment where you're acting in a public space. The pressures and demands are huge, and we haven't really had enough of an appreciation for the mental stress. And at the time and after a career, I think it's important to continue with that mental health support, whether it's coaches, players, managers, etc. It's a very stressful environment, and important to acknowledge that and put systems in place that address that.
Yeah. Toki, I want to say thank you, man. We're going to talk a little bit about what he's going to do post-rugby and how we're going to keep him involved. But yeah, you were my second doctor that I had, and you've done wonderful things for me. I remember writing a letter to you once, but you can keep that to yourself, just saying thank you for that.
Absolutely, and I'll always appreciate that. I'll tell the people who are listening that at the end of his time with us, Rassie wrote me a letter to say thank you, basically, for all the time. And it meant so much to have a player who sat down, he typed the letter out in English. I mean, you'll acknowledge English wasn't your first language. It's still not, but even then, it was obviously an effort for you, and you did a great, and it meant a tremendous amount to me. And for any person in any career, the best acknowledgement you can have is for someone to say thank you. And I've never, ever forgotten that. And those were great times. And so thank you for this opportunity, for your time as a player and a patient, and Steven as well. Thank you for what you've done for South African rugby. Really, you've given us a lot of joy. And from my daughters, a message to your wife to say thank you for all she's done on social media as well. They're die-hard followers.
Thanks, Toki. Appreciate that.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Cheers,
Appreciate it.
I just think I wanted to show you this. The first time when we were at the World Cup. And you remember what happened?
Yeah, I remember it like this.
What do you think about this? I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this.
Beast standing up, so Coach, I want to be on the field in the start. The Wednesday before the Namibia game in 2019 was probably one of the funnest nights I've had in a Springbok camp. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah.